Do you have symptoms that your doctors can't explain? Do you feel like no matter how many protocols you do, supplements you take, or diet changes you make, your symptoms don't go away or they don't stay away? Have you burned through loads of cash and doctors trying to find out the root causes of your symptoms without seemingly anything to show for it? If so, you may be dealing with mold. On today's episode, we are diving all into the symptoms that mold toxicity can cause because they are a lot. I want to give you the most thorough list of mold symptoms in one spot that I could think of because I have never seen a resource like this be so thorough before. My goal is that when you hear all these symptoms, you can map your story onto these in a way that gives you a major clue to a potential source of your mystery symptoms so that you no longer feel like a mystery and you can finally get your next steps to feeling better. It's time to buckle in and get ready. We're about to take a dive into mold toxicity. Hey friend, welcome to the Better Belly podcast. If you're currently trying endless supplements, doctor visits, and diet changes to heal your mystery symptoms, you are in the right place. We're here to solve the real root causes behind your gut, hormones, skin, sleep, and brain concerns. Literally anything and everything in your body. My name is Allison Jordan. I'm a functional medicine practitioner that has supported over 150 clients just like you to heal problems that no one has been able to fix. You don't need a perfect diet or a random supplement you found on Instagram to heal. You need a proven system that heals your whole body from the inside out. That's what I'm here to share with you, episode by episode. It's time to make health easy again. And just as a reminder, this information is not meant to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your own health practitioner before you make any changes to your health. Okay, guys, before we dive into today's episode, I just want to give you a heads up, if you cannot already see the length of the episode, that it is going to be a longer episode, maybe not even in terms of time, but there's just a lot of list. There's a lot of things I'm about to list, and I want to encourage you as you're listening, you don't need to feel like you memorize them all. This is not a quiz. I want you to just listen for what stands out to you in terms of your own symptoms. Just listen, and I'm going to sit with some different symptoms if I have additional things to say, but even if I go past it fairly fast, take note of it. It still matters, even if I don't sink into it. All of these things I'm about to list are real symptoms that my clients have had, that my colleagues' clients have had, that are literally noted in scientific literature to be caused by mold and mycotoxins. And so no matter how much or little time I spend on a symptom, listen for those. And if it's not your symptom, you don't have to feel like it's going to happen. Not everyone gets all the symptoms in this list. If we did, it would be crazy. That person would be like a crazy medical case. Doesn't mean you might have a lot of these symptoms, but again, you don't have to have every symptom to have mold toxicity, but you are looking for, do you have a lot of cumulative symptoms? And I am also going to point out in this episode some symptoms that I see being very much highly indicative of mold, because there's just some symptoms, which you're about to learn, that I have found if somebody tells me they have this symptom, I'm immediately suspicious of mold. I'm not like, that might be being caused by some type of heavy metal toxicity or a parasite or a food sensitivity. I'm like, no, that's mold. So before we jump into the symptoms of mold, I want to give you a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about some scientific stuff around mold. So number one, how does mold even get into the body? And number two, what is the difference between mold and mycotoxins, which is very key to understanding the actual conversation we're trying to have on mold toxicity. So mold gets into the body via three main pathways. Number one is your lungs, so every time you breathe. Number two is your gut, which is actually via your snot. So as you breathe in to your nose, you're going to get these mycotoxins, which I'm about to explain what mycotoxins are. You breathe them into the nose and they get caught in your mucus of your nose, your snot, which is the actual, one of the things your nose is supposed to do is catch everything, dust particles, all sorts of stuff. Just catch it and make sure it doesn't get into your airway system. So it's doing its job. But then what happens is that we do produce, even under normal circumstances, a little bit of extra snot that we will swallow. But especially if there's actually mycotoxins that you're breathing in, you will produce extra snot. Sometimes it's just a little bit, but sometimes it's a lot. And that extra snot, however little or much snot there is going on as you swallow it, if it has a mycotoxin in it, it ends up in your gut. It goes down the esophagus, down the chute, into the stomach, into the rest of the gut, and that's how it gets into the gut and does a lot of damage. And then the last is skin, which is a real thing. I typically am seeing mold cause the most amount of skin problems when it goes internal to external. So going basically from the gut to the bloodstream to the skin, because the bloodstream now circulates everywhere, including the skin, and that's where it will cause skin problems. And it is damaging to the skin. Mold is specifically, it's this fancy word scientifically is dermatoxic. It is toxic to our skin. But the two main ways I'm always really thinking of is lungs and gut. And at the end of the day, it's in your body. And it's going to now give you symptoms. Now, how is it giving you symptoms? Let's talk about the science between mold and mycotoxins. So mold, I want you to think of mold when we say that word. We're talking about the plant, like an actual little fungus that like if you're thinking a mushroom, or if even though a flower is not a fungus, if you think of a flower, this is what you are talking about in terms of the mold. It's the actual plant structure. And then the mycotoxin is more similar to the pollen. It is a very small product, so it's even smaller than the plant. So pollen is smaller and more microscopic than a flower. Mycotoxins are smaller and even more microscopic than the mold particles, and mold is already very, very small. Mycotoxins are even smaller. They're about the size of the COVID molecule, if you guys are familiar with how small COVID was and why it was so dang hard to filter out, and why you had to, like, even your average mask wasn't good enough. There was a whole thing with COVID being just a very, very small molecule. And so mycotoxins are super tiny. They're this pollen. Now, some of us are allergic to the plant. So some of us are allergic to mold, and that is an IgE response, and it's like an allergy. If you get exposed to mold, whether or not the mold is creating mycotoxins, because not all mold is creating mycotoxins or creating lots of mycotoxins. So you can be exposed to mold that isn't creating mycotoxins, and if you have an allergy to it, you will have an allergic response. So puffy eyes and face, congestion, maybe your throat gets sore, maybe some skin reaction, eyes are watering, and that's an IgE allergy response. But all of us are sensitive to mycotoxins because mycotoxins are toxic. Now, there is differing degrees that people can be sensitive to mycotoxins, and it has to do largely with genetics, but it also can have to do with your current toxin load. So if you have two people whose genetics are the same, but one person's full of lead toxicity and mercury toxicity from metal fillings that they got in their teeth, and they have copper toxicity from a copper IUD, and they, if they have a whole slew of other, they have a parasite because their immune system's down from all their heavy metal toxins, and they just have a bunch of other stuff. Those same two people, if exposed to mold, one of them might yield no symptoms and the other one will. Now, just because you're not yielding symptoms doesn't mean the mycotoxin isn't toxic, but it does mean you're still under your toxin threshold. Your body is managing that level of toxicity without yielding symptoms. So this is a situation of everyone being sensitive to mycotoxins, but not everybody yielding results, is something you'll commonly see in families where not everyone's getting a symptom. And so you have some people who are sick, and that's why doctors think, first off, it can be really hard to make a case even inside the family. If you have one family member who's super sick, the mom, a kid, it's commonly the mom or the kid, but sometimes the husband. You have one person who's super sick, or two or three, but it's not everybody. Making a case to the other spouse to say, we need to do something in our house about this mold toxicity can be hard, especially if they're like, but I'm not sick. If this stuff is so toxic, why do I have no symptoms? So there can be a large variety, both genetically and with just your current health history, of why You may or may not be reacting to a mycotoxin with actual symptoms. But the other thing is that maybe everybody's having symptoms in a family, but they're all different. And that's another variation on genetics and how that person's processing their mold toxicity. So the most common scenario I see is either, one to two, I guess you'd say, one out of an entire family, whether the family's 3 or 4 or 6 people, or it could be 2 or 3. It's either that case where not everybody in the family's sick, or if everybody's sick, they all look different. One person gets headaches and migraines, another person has horrible eczema, another person can't sleep and is infertile, another person has really bad PMS. Like, you're going to have a huge variety of symptoms, so it all looks different, and you're all seeing different doctors. One's seeing an endocrinologist, one's seeing a neurologist, so you're not getting this big picture of you are all mold sick. All right, so that's the difference between mold and mycotoxins. Now you know how it gets into your body. Mycotoxins, they're super small. They can pass into your bloodstream through your lungs. They get past the alveoli, which is where you get that exchange of oxygen into your bloodstream. It's a super, super tiny space, and mycotoxins are small enough to be able to pass that and go straight into your bloodstream every time you breathe, which is 20,000 times a day, and then into your gut via snot. All right. Now, we're already 11 minutes into this podcast episode. Guys, there's so much to say. This is such a juicy episode, and I'm hoping, if this is totally new to you, let me tell you, I'm being more thorough than many, many places that I see information on mold happening. So you're welcome. If you are familiar, if you've been in the mold conversation for a while, you might have already noticed that maybe I've shared something you've never heard before, and that is my goal. So I am taking my time in sharing stuff today because I want it to be thorough. There's so many little things to share. That being said, even though I'm aiming to be as thorough as possible, I am going to miss symptoms. I'm not going to list every symptom under the sun that mold can create, and I might miss one that you're having. So just because I don't list it, that some symptom you're having, I can't even list it because I know how many things I'm about to share with you, and I just don't know which one I missed. If I don't list it, it doesn't mean mold's not causing it. You could sometimes Google, mold and blank, or join a Facebook group that talks about mold and see if anybody's talking. Do a little search in that group for your symptom. There is so many symptoms mold can cause, and that's just my disclaimer that even as thorough as I'm about to be, don't write mold off just because I don't list one of your symptoms or 2 or even 3, like however many it is. Okay. All right. I have split up the next sections into, all the symptoms into parts of the body, and I love visuals. So I want you to close your eyes if you're not driving and imagine a body, like if you were to look at a chart and there's like a body in front of it. And then I'm just going to try and scan kind of top to bottom, but that doesn't totally work out this way just because the nature of the body. I'm going to work like top to bottom in symptoms, and I'm going to group symptoms by the systems of the body. So, the brain and the central nervous system, the respiratory system, your skin, your gut. I'm going to organize them all by that. Sound great? Okay, guys. So the first one is your brain. Top of the body, central nervous system, hangs out there. So mycotoxins can cross the blood-brain barrier. They're small enough, and they will cause heavy amounts of neuroinflammation. They are neurotoxic inherently. So they're going to cause any symptom in the brain that the brain manages. So we're thinking mood, anxiety, depression, mood swings, can also be correlated in actually diagnosed conditions like bipolar disorder, and as well as even major depressive disorder, panic attacks, etc. It can cause focus problems. Think brain fog, think ADHD, think just inattentiveness, especially if it feels like it's gotten worse over time, which most of the time we're like, oh, I'm a mom, I've got 3 kids, I can't focus anymore. Or, and our lives are more hectic as you get older. Like there's just more details, there's bills to pay, there's more things to remember than when you were 12, but there's a certain level where our brains should be developing and mastering new skills, and your brain likely has mastered new skills, but if you feel like you're still sliding back in remembering things, there can be a very big component of neuroinflammation due to mycotoxins. You have memory problems, so similar to that, just short-term memory, long-term memory, poor name recall of like people you know and you just can't think of their name, or poor word recall, like, oh, I know that word, that vocabulary word, and I just can't think of it. It's on the tip of my tongue. It can be a neurotoxic problem caused by mycotoxins. Any type of sleep problem, so insomnia, difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, just maybe you're sleeping, but you're not getting into REM sleep. You may or may not know that, but it can essentially result in you're sleeping the whole time, but you're not feeling rested. Night terrors, sleepwalking, these can all be caused by neuroinflammation caused by mycotoxins. Dizziness and vertigo. This is a little red flag, like ding, ding, ding. This is one of the symptoms that if someone says, I get dizziness, unexplained dizziness, not like lightheadedness if you stand up really fast, though that can be related to it, more on the low blood pressure side of things that mold toxicity can cause. But by any means, like mold toxicity does not only cause, it's not the only thing that causes low blood pressure. But the dizziness, vertigo, maybe you're just sitting there or you feel it pretty intensely, like the whole room spins when you stand up. That's different than just like you get lightheaded. This dizziness, vertigo thing, very, very, very mold toxic thing. So if somebody says they have that, parasites don't cause dizziness, like low stomach acid doesn't cause dizziness, things that I talk about on the podcast a lot that might cause bloating or acid reflux or constipation. Those things are not causing dizziness. You know what is causing dizziness? Mold. And again, that's not the only thing that can cause dizziness, but if you have dizziness and vertigo and you've ruled out vestibular issues, you've ruled out musculoskeletal problems like C1, C2 isn't right in the right spot, or any type of neck or brain damage that you might have had, TBIs, these can all cause dizziness and vertigo. If those are not a part of your health history or they've been ruled out, do seriously consider mold toxicity. I pretty much always test for mold if someone says they have dizziness in my program, in my experience as a practitioner. Anytime someone's been diagnosed with PANS or PANDAS, which is typically a childhood diagnosis, can occur in adults. If you don't know what it is, then I'm not going to go honestly in that deep end, but it's if you want to Google it and look into it more, you can go, it's capital P, capital A, capital N, capital S, or then PANDAS, all capital, like plural for the animal pandas. Temperature dysregulation problems, particularly being like sensitive to hot and cold. Essentially, your body's not managing its temperature well, and the hypothalamus helps you regulate your temperature. This is different than cold hands and feet, which is typically a circulation problem, which is more related to the cardiovascular system, and that also is a symptom of mold toxicity. But more of the I get hot and I can't cool down, I get cold and I can't warm up, like very intense. You people, if this is one of your symptoms, you know what it is. If you're like, I don't like being hot, that is different. I don't like being cold, that is different. And again, the cold hands, feet doesn't quite fall into that. Eye problems, so light sensitivity, red eyes, blurred vision. Ear problems, tinnitus, ear popping, fluid in your ear, chronic ear infections. This is all often related to the fact that the eustachian tubes get swollen. They don't drain effectively. So you can get all of these ear popping, fluid in ear, chronic ear infections in both kids and adults. The tinnitus is not always related to the ear and the eustachian tube, because tinnitus can also be actually in the brain tissue, which is an interesting and slightly annoying truth of the matter of tinnitus. Tinnitus can be caused by things not related to mold. It can be caused by hypothyroidism. So it can be caused by structural imbalances, whiplash. So just because you have tinnitus, don't think I have mold toxicity. But if you've already looked into structural problems, you've gotten chiropractic care to help your neck and your cervical spine, you've gotten craniosacral therapy to help with your meninges and your neck and your head. If you've gotten stuff, you know your thyroid is fine, then, and you still have tinnitus, then it can be a really big thing to look into mold toxicity. And I'll be honest, I actually been struggling with tinnitus since January. I'm almost 100% positive it is related to mold toxicity. And I'm having a whole podcast episode this month, since it's a mold month. This entire month, all the podcast episodes are on mold. I'm going to have a podcast episode where I'm going to talk about what I've been doing to address and work with this tinnitus problem, where I think it came from. Maybe you're like, oh my gosh, does some person who's an expert in mold, how do you get mold exposure? Let me tell you, it happens. So I'm going to bear it all. And if you have tinnitus, you definitely want to hear it. Even if you don't have tinnitus, but you're curious what it's like for a practitioner who literally knows all this stuff about health, like what are the steps that I'm taking, even as I'm literally watching myself get symptoms that I'm like, oh crap, I know what this is. You're going to love the episode. I think I'm going to talk about the emotional journey it's been. I'm going to talk about practical steps I've taken. It's going to be a really, really great episode. So definitely, if you are not subscribed to this podcast, do subscribe so you can hear that episode, plus some other juicy ones I'm going to mention that are coming up as well. All right, so that's it for the brain. Again, might not be every symptom, but it's a lot. All right, next system, respiratory. So starting with the nose, think chronic congestion, sinusitis, postnasal drip, frequent sinus infections. I consider frequent sinus infections one time a year or more. So if you are just like, I get one sinus infection every year, I mean, again, it might not just be mold. There could be like a deviated septum, meaning that the middle part of your nose isn't straight up your nose. It's crooked. And so it can make your airway on your left sinus or your right sinus or both be smaller, meaning you just don't get as much airway. So you are more likely to get infections. But if you don't have a deviated septum, or you already dealt with it and got a surgery for it and you're still getting sinus infections one time a year or more, definitely something to look into is mold toxicity. Nosebleeds, as a child or as adult, just if you're getting nosebleeds, it is not because of the cold. It is not because of it's dry weather. This is a bunch of BS. It is mold is, in my experience, the number one cause of nosebleeds. Like, you know, if it's dry weather, you should have been out in the freezing cold all day as a kid, or you should have been like literally smashing your face on something because of like a soccer ball hitting you or something. Should not be bleeding in there. Enlarged adenoids and tonsils, because those are immune tissue, and if they're constantly getting exposed to mycotoxins, they will swell up. They will not like you, which can also, when that happens, can cause a lot of chronic congestion, can cause mouth breathing. Mouth breathing will cause a narrowed upper palate. That will cause crowded teeth. The crowded teeth and the narrowed upper palate will correlate with snoring and apnea, both in children and in adults. You might be more likely to, if you've ever needed teeth pulled because you didn't have enough space in your mouth for teeth, or your teeth are currently crooked, or you've had to do a lot of facial surgery to make enough space in your mouth for that. Even if the facial surgery corrected the actual structure of your face, which sometimes facial, like a narrow palate, can just be like a tongue tie, a hidden tongue tie you had as a kid that never got addressed. Totally fine, perfectly normal. But if it wasn't a tongue tie, it can be mold toxicity that made you congested, so you had to mouth breathe to get air into your body. Sometimes it'll be a tongue tie and mold toxicity, and that's also a not fun combination. But when you have the snoring and apnea, you also are then going to get symptoms related to poor sleep. So low energy, poor cognition, waking up lots of time in the middle of the night, mood dysregulation, focus problems, all the symptoms you can get with poor sleep, even like growth problems. So not growing as much, undergrowing, underthriving. This can be again in children, teens, adults, all signs of mold toxicity because of how it affects your nose and your face and your sleep. Asthma, especially in children, narrowed bronchial passageways, and decreased ciliary clearance, meaning we have these like little fuzzy, they're called cilia in our lungs to try and move mucus and debris out of the way and not get into our alveoli. But the cilia will get damaged by the mycotoxins. They'll literally get shorter. And so you have decreased ciliary clearance, meaning you just have a lot of extra mucus that gets stuck in the wrong spot. You might have more of a raspy breath, or have a lot of like popping when you take a deep breath. That's because, number one, it can be because of that mucus that is on the surface of the bronchial tubes, and it'll pop open. But then also the bronchial tubes can become stiffened, and they will also pop pop open in the alveoli. So when you're taking that deep breath and you're hearing popping, and maybe you don't hear any of that, but maybe you feel like you have a difficult time taking a full breath, or it's easier for you to get sick with respiratory infections. Like you're just always getting a cold, an upper respiratory infection with cough and stuff. Chronic cough can be a component of this. You're prone to recurrent pneumonia infection. So if you're getting pneumonia one time a year or more, I have a friend right now who's had pneumonia multiple times this year. I'm like, you want to be looking for mold in your body and in your component of your health. If you're sensitive to exercise, especially cardio, like you just can't get a good enough breath. These are all signs of mold toxicity. All right, next is skin. This is a short list, but a lot of people have these. So your skin's a detox organ. So in general, if you are being exposed to constant toxins, it's gonna gunk up your system. Your liver won't be able to keep up. And so your skin's gonna have to do some of the job. So you're gonna end up with lots of additional acne, eczema, psoriasis, or rashes. These are all signs that the skin is trying to do a detox job it was not meant to do. Now, mold's not the only thing that can junk up skin. So if you have acne, eczema, psoriasis, rashes, definitely doesn't mean you have mold toxicity, but it does mean you have toxins your body is not dealing with well, and you want to get that looked into. Which ones is it? Is it estrogen dominance? Is it heavy metals? Is there a parasite? Is there low stomach acid leading to a zinc deficiency, meaning your skin can be massively infected by zinc deficiencies. You need a lot of good zinc to have good skin health. There's a lot of things that can impact skin, but another thing you'll see with skin is a histamine response leading to hives and rashes. So if you have unexplained hives and rashes that come and go, or come more than they go, they just like hanging out. Even if it feels like it's correlated to food, you should not be sensitive to food to that level. And increasing food sensitivities, or just food sensitivities to basically everything under the sun, or even if you are sensitive to high histamine foods, I'm not going to get into that. If you don't know what it is, it's not the episode for this. But if you're sensitive to those, mold can be a part of your bad histamine response. Histamine sensitivity should not be permanent. It is not permanent. But if you're having to eat a permanent low histamine diet, it's because you're not getting to the root causes of your chronic histamine release. All right, that's skin. Gut. The gut. I started as a gut person. I thought I was only going to talk about the gut. I'm like, I'm going to stay in my lane. And then sure enough, all these toxins and pathogens that are impacting the gut are also impacting all these other systems of the body. And so gut is my first love. And the mold's going to cause a lot of gut symptoms, but by no means is it the only one. So let's talk about this. So we already know that mycotoxins get in the snot, we swallow it. The first thing it's going to be touching is the stomach. And the mycotoxins in the snot definitely irritate the gut lining. That stomach is often going to produce more stomach acid as a result of the irritation. So we're thinking acid reflux, burning in the stomach, burping, excessive burping, things like this. You can have the mycotoxins will also, get this, damage the myoenteric plexus. Myo means muscle, enteric means like the gut nervous system. Plexus is just the overall, like all the nerves combined, essentially. So myoenteric plexus is the nerve bundle that helps the gut move. If you damage the myoenteric plexus, the gut does not move as efficiently. So we're looking at slow motility, which is going to correlate with problems, particularly things like bloating and constipation. But mold will also cause diarrhea due to an immune response where the body's like, get that thing out of here. So you can alternate diarrhea and constipation. You can have only constipation. You can have only diarrhea, and they can all be caused by mold. Gross. All right. Another thing that I see correlated with mold is eosinophilic esophagitis, or EOE. This is going to be a reaction in the esophagus to the snot full of mycotoxins. And now, mold is not the only thing that will cause EOE, but I definitely see a lot of mold toxicity in EOE cases. Now, the other thing that I do see a lot of is parasites, and then also food sensitivities, but usually food sensitivities is not enough to get EOE to go away. So you do want to look at, if someone comes in with EOE, I'm immediately saying, do you have H. pylori? Do you have any foods? What food sensitivities do you have that we don't know about, or that you're basically still currently eating? Do you have mold toxicity, and do you have a parasite? That's not the only thing, but it's probably the top 4 things I'm thinking of. Nausea. If you have chronic nausea, you hate it and it sucks. And that can be caused by mold. It's not the only thing that will cause nausea, but it's a big one. Abdominal pain due to the inflammation in the gut lining, IBS, whether that's IBS or IBS-C or IBS-D or IBS-M, chronic candida overgrowth. So if you feel like you have all the candida symptoms, you've done the low candida diet or the candida diet, which is usually like low sugar, low carb, you've done a candida protocol, you've taken candida supplements, or maybe you've done no protocol related candida, but you just think you have candida because you have a lot of symptoms related to it. You might actually have a candida overgrowth because mold will actually enable other funguses in the body to overgrow. It just causes them to go haywire. And so candida is a fungus that everybody has. Like I have it. The question is it overgrown? And if it is overgrown, why is it overgrown? I have a whole podcast episode on this, episode 149. It's called the Candida episode, 4-step natural candida treatment. And I have a link in the show notes, and go and listen to that. You'll learn a lot about candida. I believe I mentioned mold on there. If I don't, it is still connected. But there's a lot of other things that are components to candida, recurrent candida, or just in general having a candida overgrowth that are root causes that pretty much very few doctors, including functional doctors, are addressing in their protocols, meaning people just keep getting their candida overgrowth back. It sucks. A white coating on your tongue, which kind of goes back to mouth and oral health. I didn't actually create a separate oral health section. I just kind of threw it in with the gut. But white coating on the tongue is going to be that yeast overgrowth in the mouth, often related to candida, but it can also be things like oral thrush. Again, all this is yeast and fungal overgrowth in the body. Again, because mold will cause all of that to flare up. So you're also going to be looking at things like chronic cavities, dental illnesses like gingivitis, because of the oral microbiome disruption of mold, both in the gut, but also if you're mouth breathing, just mouth breathing inherently is disruptive to the oral microbiome. So, and of course, we already talked about mouth breathing has a higher rate of likelihood if you have mold toxicity because of that sinus inflammation. By the way, should have said this earlier, you can have 0 sinus symptoms, 0, and have mold toxicity. I'd say like 50%, it might be higher than this, at least 50% of my clients with mold toxicity have no sinus symptoms. They have no congestion, no difficulty breathing through their noses, no drainage and sinus stuff. It's just, and I actually tend to be one of those people. I don't get tons of sinus symptoms, but I know I have mold toxicity right now and it sucks. Mainly because of that tinnitus. But that being said, white coating on the tongue and any type of oral dysfunction, we're just getting cavities or lots of dental procedures that you need could be because of mold toxicity. SIBO, if you've ever had SIBO once, let alone, but especially if you have this kind of chronic or recurring SIBO where it never quite fully goes away, you seriously want to look into mold. I'm saying seriously. I have a whole episode on SIBO and the main reasons why SIBO has a 50% recurrence rate. It's episode 70. I'll have a link in the show notes. Both mold is basically aggravating both candida and SIBO in a very similar way. Although SIBO is technically a bacterial overgrowth instead of a fungal overgrowth, but it's creating this dysregulation. Some of it has to do with the fact that the mold is damaging the myoenteric plexus. And so you're getting this slow motility, which is a very good setup. It's a very big setup for developing SIBO, is you don't have enough motility in the gut. But there's a lot of other factors to it. So go check out episode 70 if you want to know more about SIBO. If you think you have it, know you have it, have had it multiple times, and you're sick of it, go check it out. Leaky gut. Mycotoxins are super damaging to the gut lining. Leaky gut's going to create all sorts of increased food sensitivity. So if you had no known problems with food prior to a certain age, or maybe you were like, I was sensitive to dairy, but that was always true. But then suddenly I turned 20 or I turned 30 or I have 3 kids or whatever it is, or I get COVID and I'm sensitive to everything. Yeah, you better believe mold can be a huge component of it. And I mentioned COVID because we're just talking about an inflammatory load. If you've been in a moldy house for 10 years, but then you get COVID and it busts open the level of inflammation in your body, you're going to suddenly manifest totally new symptoms. But you've been having a 10-year buildup without fully knowing it, because you might have had moderate symptoms, but nothing to write home about. And also it's so easy for us to write off, like if I'm getting some mild brain fog, if I'm having some mild word recall problems, if I'm having some mild sleep issues or fatigue, oh, it's just because I'm getting older. It's because I have 3 kids. It's because I work a full-time job, whatever it is. And those things can make us tired, but I think we are giving them way too much credit than they're due. Any symptom related to leaky gut, because mycotoxins can create leaky gut, you're going to be looking at that. Your blood supply is going to have significantly higher levels of inflammation when you have leaky gut, because stuff is leaking into them that shouldn't. And that blood goes everywhere in your body. It goes to your brain, goes to your skin, goes to your organs, goes to your muscles and your joints. And that's where you get all these symptoms showing up. Difficulties taking supplements, maybe because it's actually hard to swallow them because of the inflammation in the esophagus, but also you're more sensitive to supplements, and that will happen too as you have prolonged mycotoxin exposure. Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, because of the connection to immune dysregulation that mold causes. Liver congestion symptoms, I'm not going to go into this super deep, but some of them are like waking 2 to 4 a.m., having lowered glutathione levels, estrogen dominance, PMS. I have a whole episode on the liver, episode 118. It's literally called Liver, the number one thing you can do to ease bloating and PMS, even if you don't have bloating and PMS as a primary concern, and you do want to learn about liver and liver congestion symptoms, go check out that episode. And it also talks about things you can do to support your liver. Any type of issues with your kidneys. Mycotoxins are super nephrotoxic, which is the fancy word for kidneys, toxic to the kidneys. So think kidney infections, kidney diseases, kidney failure, kidney stones. These can all be linked to mold toxicity. Kidney stones primarily through something called high oxalate levels, which mold will blow up your oxalate levels in your body. It has nothing to do with your diet. If you know anything about oxalate toxicity, it has nothing to do with your diet. You can only control how many oxalates you have in your body with your diet. So it's a control lever, but everybody should be able to eat lots of oxalates and have no problems. So if you have a problem with oxalates, you want to be thinking, what's causing leaky gut? And do you have mold toxicity? Urinary problems, so think chronic UTIs, especially usually due to this fungal imbalance in the body. Interstitial cystitis, again, that kind of autoimmune response, inflammation of the lining of the bladder because of mycotoxins, getting peed out. You literally pee them out. That's how they come out. And that's the main way that we test mycotoxins in the body is a urine sample. And if they're in that urine, they are going to irritate the bladder lining. Again, I have no symptoms with my bladder. I have a lot of clients who don't, but if you do have interstitial cystitis or a lot of symptoms with bladder, so it's like frequent urination, waking up to pee constantly, burning when you pee, even especially if it burns when you pee and you don't have a kidney infection or like a UTI, and they're kind of like, we don't know why this happens. And you've already had pelvic floor therapy, which sometimes burning can be related to stuff pelvic floor therapy can fix. Think mold toxicity. Reproductive problems, hormone imbalances of any kind, PMS, endometriosis, PCOS symptoms and flares, especially if your PCOS is super active, like you're getting all your PCOS symptoms, weight gain, hair thinning, greasy hair and skin, acne, etc. Despite controlling your blood sugar and managing your stress, then you want to think about mold toxicity and or other infections like parasites, H. pylori, etc. Amenorrhea, which is a lack of a period. This is because inflammation lowers progesterone, which is going to cause that anovulatory state, which can lead to no period. But then eventually enough inflammation will also lower all hormones, including estrogen. So then really no period. Chronic vaginal infections, which is usually a yeast vaginal infection, itchy, which again, I consider chronic or recurrent 1 time a year or more. So if you're just like, every year I get one, that's too much. Itchiness in your vagina, particularly smelly discharge, infertility, usually because your inflammation is lowering your progesterone first. So anovulation and then infertility, miscarriages, because mycotoxins can cross the placenta and they can make it difficult to maintain progesterone levels, and then lowered progesterone in general. Like if your doctor's like, you have low progesterone, inflammation causes low progesterone. Now, mold is not the only thing that lowers or causes inflammation, but it's just one. It's just one of them. If you've looked into other things that might be causing inflammation and you've dealt with them and you're still getting enough you still have low progesterone, then you still have high inflammation, and you want to be asking what is causing that. Immune issues. So seasonal allergies, like whether you've always had them or they're new or they're worsening. I had seasonal allergies for like 3 years in college, and I look back, I'm like, oh, I totally had mold exposure. And I was like, I didn't know anything about science, at least health related science, to the level I do now back then. And I was just like, this is so weird. I'm getting allergies suddenly. Yeah. I also had depression in college. So, to the level that I was having suicidal ideation. So unfortunately, I have concern that some of it might have been related to mold exposure. Seasonal allergies in the winter. If you're like, oh, it's winter and I have new seasonal allergies, it's my season. No, it's because you're indoors, and that's where all the mold likes to hang out. And there's a lot more humidity. It's dry indoors, but there's a lot of more condensation opportunity because we're heating the house, and then there's cold things condensing, whether it's on your windows, especially if your window, it doesn't have good sealing, so that you've got all this condensation between your window panes. That is mold. Like, mold, that's just a big mold factory right there. Seasonal allergies in winter is not a thing, but mold toxicity and heightened exposure to mold because of spending more time indoors in winter is. Autoimmune conditions, because mycotoxins are a huge inflammatory trigger to autoimmune conditions starting or worsening. MCAS, which is mast cell activation syndrome. It's not the episode to talk about MCAS, but if you have it and you have not heard that mold's a big component of it, now you know. It's very important to know. If you want to have any hope of bringing down your MCAS, you want somebody to always be looking and seeing, do you have mold toxicity? Histamine sensitivity, immune deficiency, so just you're getting sick a lot of time, increased likelihood you're going to be ill. Or you get sick and you stay sick longer than your family members or your friends, things like that. And then it sets you up for other pathogens to dominate. Think SIBO, Candida, parasites, H. pylori, bacterial overgrowth, thing like that. Cardiovascular issues, low blood pressure, high blood pressure, cold hands and feet due to poor circulation, POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, nosebleeds, because mycotoxins thin your arterial walls, and it also sets you up. It does this duo thing, which is super evil. Both makes your blood more thin and can lower your blood pressure, but it can also set you up for blood clotting literally at the same time. So you can have thrombosis and also like nosebleeds and bleeding problems, or even if it's not nosebleeds, think you bruise more easily, or your bruises are really slow to heal. And you're like, where did this bruise come from? It's not the only thing that will cause bruising issues. Low nitric oxide can cause bruising problems and difficulty, also cold hands and feet. But low nitric oxide, one big thing that can lower it is mold. So all on that, mold is always a root cause factor, I consider. Any problems with your adrenal or your energy system. And energy system is not a real system, but think mitochondrial dysfunction, which you probably won't be like, I have mitochondrial dysfunction, but you will say, I have chronic fatigue. I need a nap every afternoon. I need to drink coffee to be able to keep functioning. It doesn't matter how much I sleep. I feel tired. These are all energy issues. And energy is usually starts at the mitochondria, which mycotoxins totally damage. These are the batteries that hang out inside your cells, every single cell. Mycotoxins will cause excessive constant cortisol release, which will initially cause acute adrenal release, really high cortisol levels, and then eventually will lead to adrenal fatigue and low cortisol. And basically, you breathe 20,000 times a day. If every breath is toxic, or even like half of your breaths are toxic, say it's like you're only home when you sleep. Well, you're sleeping like 6 to 8 hours, hopefully a night, hopefully on the higher end. So if you're mold issues in your home where you're sleeping, then that's super alarming to your body. Or maybe your home's perfectly fine, but it's where you work. You work at a school and the school has mold issues and you're there 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, or however long you're there. That means you're having this constant cortisol release from breathing in those toxins. Thyroid dysfunction of any kind, so hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's and Graves', again, with bringing in that autoimmune component, hypothyroidism. And then weight gain and weight loss issues, usually basically metabolic disruption. I've had both weight gain and weight loss problems with clients where they're too thin, they can't gain weight, or they're gaining weight for literally no reason. Those are like, again, mold's not the only issue. Low stomach acid, parasites, H. pylori can all be a component of this. But if you've already worked with functional docs and looked into some of those, if no one's looking into mold for you, definitely should be a thing. Musculoskeletal problems is the last section. We're almost done, guys. 45 minutes of symptoms, y'all. That's crazy. Muscle cramping, Ehlers EDS, which is Ehlers, I hate saying this word, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a connective tissue disorder. There's actually multiple kinds of variations of connective tissue disorder in EDS, but it's often going to be connected with basically hypermobility. And just because you have hypermobile joints doesn't mean you have EDS, but connective tissue disorders are highly connected to mold toxicity. Fibromyalgia, because of how mold toxicity throws off things like oxalate levels, calcium, pain receptor disruption. It can impact all of that in the body, which can create that kind of phantom pain that fibromyalgia is known for. But fibromyalgia also gets a lot of brain fog. It has a high correlation and comorbidity with depression and IBS. I have a whole podcast episode called the IBS fibromyalgia connection, and mold is one of the connectors between IBS and fibromyalgia. So if you have either IBS or fibromyalgia, but especially if you have both, think mold and go check out episode 83. I have the link in the show notes. Chronic pain, joint pain, muscle pain, and stiffness. Whew, that is the list, y'all. Did I breathe? I'm not sure. I was trying to say that so fast so you guys weren't here for forever. I was originally, and thankfully I already knew I couldn't do this before I even started recording. I was originally going to have a section on symptoms split up by mycotoxin, because there's different types of mycotoxins. Think like mycotoxins are these pollens that mold is creating, but then there's different types of pollens. There's pollens, from a tree. There's pollens from grass. There's pollens from flowers. And it's the same with mold, that there's different mold species and they each produce different mycotoxins. So I just thought I would say some of the mycotoxin names in case, just to if you never heard them, you'll at least heard some of them. Aflatoxin. I always say that wrong. Chitoglobulin, citrinin, eniadin, gliotoxin, ochratoxin A, patulin, and zearalenone. I actually don't hear that said very often. I read it more often. So I apologize, but it is spelled with a Z. Those are just honestly a short and incomplete list of mycotoxins, but they're common ones that people will talk about. All right, to make this episode not super long, and one of the reasons that I have literally a mold month series going on is because now your big question is oh my gosh, a lot of my symptoms lined up. But how do I know if I had mold toxicity in my home? I don't remember seeing any mold in any of my homes, or I've been healthy since until I was in my 30s, and in the home, I've lived in the same home since my 20s. So and my current home doesn't seem like a problem. There can be all these questions on how do you basically want to be thinking about where have been potential exposures to mold that you've had, because that's one thing that I will often do other than just a straight up test. Here's a test to tell you if you have mold toxicity in your body, which I'm going to get into that too in future episodes. But basically, for all your next steps, now that you're listening to this, and even if you think there's a slight chance you have mold toxicity, there's some other things to be thinking about. So do subscribe to the podcast if you don't currently subscribe. If you do subscribe, keep an eye out for upcoming podcasts. Episode 222 in a week is going to be on the 5 hidden signs of mold in your home. And I literally have an expert mold inspector coming onto the podcast I love his company. I love his Instagram. He's got a podcast of his own. They have amazing information. And he's going to go over the actual hidden signs of mold, I think it's signs of hidden mold, because most mold you can't see. It's not going to be black spots on the front of your wall. So you need to be looking for what are the things that mold will cause that I can see around my windows or on my paint or on my ceiling if I can't actually see the mold. So hang around for episode 222. And then what to do if you think you have mold, like what's an actual healing plan. I literally have episode 223, the episode right after that. It's going to be the 3-step mold treatment plan. It's the mold treatment plan I use for my clients. No gatekeeping. I'm going to literally let you know what the treatment plan is. So subscribe to the podcast, come listen to that, because there's just like a lot of steps and layers. And if you see, like, if I were to just give it all to you right now, it'd be a lot of information, even more than I've already given. So subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, to go and listen to episode 223, or if it's the future and it's already out, go listen to it right now. But in the meantime, while you wait for those episodes to come out, I want to encourage you, if you really feel like, wow, there's a lot that lined up, I had no idea mold was causing this, or maybe you had some idea and now you feel even more convinced, whatever's going on in your little heart and your little mind, I want to encourage you. I'm just going to say it to you, to say it to your brain, not because I think it'll make you just magically stop doing it, but don't panic. It's okay. Your body is resilient. It can heal. And I don't want you to suddenly start bleaching things, thinking that there's mold under everything. Bleach and mold are not friends, and it can make your house and situation significantly more toxic. So I would recommend to wait until the upcoming episodes, not because I'm trying to slow down how much you heal, but because I'm trying to give out this information in really metered way. And again, if the episodes are already out, yay you, go and listen to them. Mold does cause a lot of neuroinflammation. And so it can cause a lot of anxiety, brain fog, and that fight and flight response. So just know, I want to say, like, take care of yourself today. Go and do something for you. Go and walk outside and enjoy some sunshine. Hopefully it's sunny today, but maybe you're listening to it in the winter. Take a warm shower, like do something that you enjoy and get your mind off of mold for a hot sec. Because I'll be honest, like in my tinnitus episode I'm going to record, I talk about that. Like, you just have to do things to get your mind off of the mold, because you will heal. You'll eventually be out of that situation. But mold is a step-by-step process, and it's not just like a take these 5 supplements and you'll be done. If it was that easy, it'd be more similar to like a parasite infection, but it's not. So do stick around, get support through the podcast. And if you're like, I want to heal right now, like Allison, like I want to be, how do you work with people? I want to do this. I work with people in my program called the Better Belly Blueprint. It is literally my proven method that I have taken and built over 6 years and 600 clients that I have found to heal people. We will help you find, do you even have mold? If you don't have mold, what is causing your symptoms? Because we work with all the symptoms that I listed today. I've worked with all of them. And we helped improve our clients' symptoms and conditions, diagnoses, autoimmune conditions, all of it. So if you want to know how to work with me, how the Better Belly Blueprint works, what's involved, go to betterbellytherapies.com/training or click the link in the show notes to learn how the Better Belly Blueprint works, how it can get you symptom and supplement free, even when nothing else has worked, because you are not stuck. You are just missing some key ingredients to healing. And as soon as you get those, your body is going to heal for you. So go to betterbellytherapies.com/training. And if you aren't going there, I cannot wait to see you next on the podcast and get you this information that I hope really changes your life. Catch you guys in a few days. Hey friend, I hope you loved this episode. If you've been a fan for a while or newly loving this podcast, can you do me a favor? Drop into Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. When you leave a review, you do so much. You help me know you're listening, you can tell me what you're loving so I know what to make more of, and you help others by boosting this podcast so other people like you can find the podcast too. I mean, it's a win-win-win, right? So if you want a way to pay it forward, just go to Apple Podcasts or click the link in my show notes and leave a rating and review. And if you want some more free stuff, just head over to my free Facebook group, betterbellytherapies.com/Facebook, and you can get access to all of my free support for you, including some Facebook group exclusive stuff like my podcast episode vault, where you can search the Better Belly podcast by topic and find exactly what you need to expedite your healing. I cannot wait to see you in there. Catch you guys next week.